Details have been published now about the new Renters' Rights Bill. Should you be worried? What are the details? What can you do about it? Okay, our beloved leader, Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, stood up in Parliament this week on Wednesday morning at PM's question time, and he announced that they are introducing this bill, the Renters' Rights Bill. I think it's virtually a rebrand of the Renters Reform Bill, which was put forward by the last government, but failed to make the cut when Rishi called that disastrous snap election, which of course they lost. And Rishi, I think they're just rebranding it, changing a few things here, maybe adding a few tough measures, and then they are launching it. Now, you can find details of this bill. Obviously, you can get summaries here and there, but you can find the actual bill and the guide to the bill on a .gov website. And I'm going to put a link to that, and I'll show you it now. I'm going to share my screen now, but you can find it. So I would urge you to look at it if you're a landlord or a tenant, really. I would urge you to have a look at this. And now the whole bill is quite long. The bill itself is, it's a couple of hundred pages. Let me see if I can share the screen here. Okay, so you can see here the site. You should be able to see that now. The actual site here, and it's .gov, and it's a long link. Well, I'm going to put the link up in my description. Okay, so it's the guide to the Renters' Rights Bill. It was previously called the Renters' Reform Bill, of course, but now it's the Renters' Rights Bill. Subtle difference there. And it gives the summary there. The Renters' Right delivers our manifesto commitment to transform the experience of private renting, for the tenants, including the ending of Section 21 no-fault evictions. And it says the bill will improve the current system for 11 million private renters and 2.3 million landlords. So, I mean, how is this going to improve the situation for landlords? I don't know. Anyway, it will give renters much greater security and stability, blah, blah, blah. And then it shows the background there, and it goes on about this background thing. And this is an overview of the bill's measures, right? Abolish Section 21 evictions, ensure possession grounds, like ground. You've got to have grounds for possession. It's not just go away. It's ground. It's like legal grounds for possessions are fair to both parties, giving tenants more security. It says here, whilst ensuring landlords can recover their property when reasonable. See, this thing, when reasonable, you can have your property back when reasonable. Do you see the language here? When it sounds quite harmless, but when you say can recover their property when reasonable, what is reasonable about wanting to recover your property? Tenant's been there a few years. I'd like my property back, please. Oh, it's got to be reasonable and fair. And the bill introduces new safeguards for tenants, giving them more time to find a home. So they're going to extend the time. Okay, here we go down here. Provide stronger protections against backdoor evictions, right? Ensuring tenants are able to appeal excessive above market rents, which are purely designed to force them out. Again, above market rents. I don't know any landlords that puts above market rents, because that is the market. You put the rent at what the market is. If you put it above the market, nobody would rent it. And let's be fair. At the moment, a landlord doesn't need to give an above market backdoor possession, because you don't need it. You can issue a Section 21, right? So it's just a load of nonsense. I don't know who writes this stuff. I mean, this bill has obviously been drafted before. They didn't come up with this bill in a few weeks. Drafting a bill like this takes weeks and weeks and weeks. It costs a lot of money. So they're rebranding it and changing a few of the clauses and paragraphs. Providing, okay. Provide stronger protections against backdoor eviction. Introduce a new private renter sector landlord ombudsman. And these are ombudsmen that you go to complain to. So before you go to court, you would go to an ombudsman, and it will give fair, impartial, and binding resolution for tenants. So this is a binding resolution. So it will avoid going to court. I mean, ombudsmen, if they're fair, can do quite a good job. And this will bring tenants' landlord complaints resolution on a par with established redress packages for tenants in social housing and consumers of property agent services. Okay, the next thing is create a private rented sector database. to help landlords. This is to help. I'm getting this is helping me, right? To help landlords understand their legal obligations and demonstrate compliance. Compliance, that word again, uh, giving good landlords confidence in their position, alongside of better information to tenants to make informed decisions when entering into a tenancy agreement. So they're almost going to put this in like a league table here. It's not for, this is not a database of rogue tenants. This is a database of landlords, right? It will also support local councils, helping them target enforcement activity where it's needed most. Landlords will need to be registered on the database in order to use certain possession grounds. So what are they saying here? You won't be able to repossess a property if you're not registered on this database. Presumably there's going to be a cost involved. I was at a council meeting last night. It was a landlords forum at a council office, and they were saying they don't know how this is going to be introduced. Will the councils have to run this, or is it going to be a government database? We don't know. I personally think we need a database of tenants, but and they're putting this in a way. This is to help us. We're going to go on this database to help us. This is another layer of red tape, isn't it? Next point here: give tenants strengthened rights to request a pet in the property. Right. I don't know what you feel about pets. I mean, some of the landlords I spoke to last night were reasonably relaxed about pets. They said, well, I've got some of my properties have got a small dog and that sort of thing. But personally, I don't like it. I don't have a pet in my house. I don't mind dogs and cats, but I don't want them in my house. I think they cause odors, smells, they can cause damage. One lady brought in a cat, unbeknown to me, in one of my properties, and it stunk. I mean, she was a dirty person anyway, but the cat couldn't have gone out of that room where she was in, and it just stunk. I had to get professional cleaners in. I had to almost fumigate the place. When you went into the room, it was like, because they left it in a complete mess, it was like gut wrenching. You wanted to sort of go out and throw up. It was really bad. So I don't want pets in my property, but it says here, give tenants strengthened rights to request a pet in the property, which landlord must consider and cannot unreasonably, this reasonable word, refuse. To support this, landlords will be able to require pet insurance to cover damage to their property. Again, what does reasonable mean? This is what judges will have to interpret, because you might say, well, I don't want the pet, then what? All these things will have to come out in the wash, and the devil will be in the further detail down the road. But this is the draft of the bill. A lot of this will become an act. Apply decent home standards to the private rented sector to give renters safer, better value homes and remove the blight of poor quality homes in local communities. Then there's this other point here about apply the AWAB law to the sector. This is about the young girl who died in a property, unfortunately, which had damp and mold. And despite complaining to the council, which owned the block, I believe, it wasn't dealt with. So this now they're bringing this into the private sector, even though this was not in a private home, setting clear expectations about the timeframes within which landlords in the private rented sector must take action to make homes safe where they contain serious hazards. In my experience as a councillor, I found the properties that were owned by housing associations were in a lot worse state in many cases than private landlords. They didn't have smoke detectors, for instance. They had all sorts of repairs that needed doing. There was dampness that couldn't be solved because the block had damp problems. A lot of these old council blocks were built in a cheap, rushed way, and then they're no longer fit for purpose. Some of the older Victorian blocks are still standing. They're great. I mean, they were built properly, but the blocks of flats that have been built 60s, 70s, they're not always that good, and some of them just need demolishing, which is happening. Then it says make it illegal for landlords and agents to discriminate against prospective tenants in receipt of benefits or with children, helping to ensure that everyone is treated fairly. Yeah, everyone. Does that include the landlords when looking for a place to live? Now, a lot of landlords don't want benefit tenants, partly because of the hassle of benefits, the fact that universal credit won't always pay the landlord directly. They decide whether, on certain grounds, whether they're going to pay the rent directly to the landlord. Like, for instance, if the tenant has been in previous arrears, they will pay the rent directly to the landlord. But they're trying to encourage the person on benefit to be responsible and manage their own finances, So in a lot of cases, they will just give the money to the tenant, and then the landlord is waiting for the tenant to pass the money over. And I had this experience myself. I've had tenants say, well, sorry, I can't pay this month because I have to send my money to my brother in Africa because he needs the money. He's sick. Or I can't send the money.
I found this on the web for make it illegal for landlords in ages to discriminate.
My phone has picked up that thing. There's Siri is searching on the web for something. Sorry about that. Yeah, so she had to send money to her brother. I said, well, that's crazy. How are you going to help your brother if you're homeless? What do you mean if I'm homeless? If you don't pay your rent, you're not going to be able to help your brother, are you? Another one said, I can't pay the rent because I'm sick, and all these excuses. But if the money had gone direct to me, they wouldn't have had that money to sit on and send to their brother or their mother or whatever, or do whatever they like. And some just, didn't give me any reason. They just, oh, I'll pay you next month and that sort of thing. So you've got to be careful. The other thing about benefit tenants is, if you're in a HMO, for instance, they will sit around the house all day, sometimes smoking wacky backy with the heating on, blaring out all day at 30 degrees. I've had this. So I've been through all this. And there's more wear and tear on the property because they're sitting around, they're using it more, blah, blah, blah. So a lot of landlords don't want they said that a lot of landlords might consider, look, I've got a nice little one-bedroom flat, I don't want kids, or I've got a nice little two-bedroom flat, I don't want parents with young children because they do damage. And I've seen this before. I've seen some wild young kids really do quite serious damage to kitchens and properties. One landlord I was helping, she had probably about £10,000 worth of damage, and she couldn't get the deposit back. When she went back to the deposit resolution, the lady made all sorts of excuses, and she only got half the deposit back. So a month's rent, she got half a month's rent, but she had to spend thousands on this property. And that tenant didn't move for like 6 months after more like 8-9 months after the Section 21 was served. She just dug in her heels. What did she do? She got no redress again. This person just disappears off into the wilderness and gone. Okay, so that's another contentious issue. End the practice of rental bidding by prohibiting landlords and agents from asking or accepting offers above the advertised rent. This is another ridiculous thing. I've had people offer me, I don't put properties on a bidding war, but you do sometimes get people say, I want this property, I'll pay you more, or I'll give you 6 months in advance or a year's in advance. It does happen sometimes, but now they're going to say, end this practice, prohibiting landlords. I mean, this is business, isn't it? When, in a marketplace, in a normal business marketplace, you can sell goods for the highest price. You can sell services and goods for the highest price. What's the difference here? When you go onto a booking.com or a hotel booking, and even ticket bookings, airline bookings, what happens? They have algorithms which put the price up as there's more demand. And when there's less rooms and more demand, the price goes up, right? Same thing with flights. Even an Uber, you book in an Uber, their price surges. Are they going to make this illegal? Are they going to make business illegal? To be honest, I'm having a little rant here, but the likes of this front bench cabinet that they've got now, Starmer and Angela Rayner, who's running all this, I wouldn't put them in charge of a market stall. I really think they couldn't run a business. What do they know? Anyway, sorry about this rant. Strengthen local authority enforcement by expanding civil penalties. I mean, there's already tens of thousands of pounds of penalties there already. Introducing a package. Now listen to this. Investigatory powers and bringing in a new requirement for local authorities to report on enforcement activity. So maybe rights to enter your property. I don't know. But I was speaking to a council official last night. He doesn't quite know how this is going to work. Who's going to pay for this? I guess landlords again. Somebody said to me, please be transparent. Are you a landlord? Yes, I make no secret of the fact that I'm a landlord and a property owner. I don't apologize for that either. So yes, I am a landlord. And I know that, on the one hand, the government is cutting winter fuel allowance, a £300 winter fuel allowance for 10 million pensioners. On the other hand, they're bringing in these things which are going to cost money, and they're giving inflation busting pay rises to unionize workforce within the public sector. So where is this money going to come from? And then it goes on here, tenancy reform, and there's a few more. I suggest you really read this, but this is the other confusing thing here. It says here, we'll introduce a transformative new tenancy system ending the threat of arbitrary Section 21 evictions. Yeah, we know that, but what is going to replace it? I'll come on to that in a second. Periodic tenancies. And this is a new one on me. Periodic tenancies. The Renters' Rights Bill will remove fixed-term tenancies, fixed-term assured tenancies. Fixed-term tenancies mean renters are obliged to pay rent regardless of whether the property is up to standard. Well, not anyway, and they reduce the flexibility to move in response to changing circumstances. For example, after a relationship breakdown, or take up a new job, or when buying a first home. So what they're saying here is, a tenant can just move out, within a couple of months, because all tenancies will be periodic, with tenants able to stay in their home until they decide to end the tenancy by giving 2 months notice. That's, you know what, this is 2 fingers, 2 months notice. And this will end the injustice of tenants being trapped, paying rent on substandard properties, and offer more flexibilities to both parties to respond to changing circumstances. Look at the language here. Trapped in substandard properties. They're assuming that properties are substandard and they're trapped in those substandard properties. They decide when they move into the property, is this property standard? If anything, it's the tenants who make it substandard during their stay. When they move in, it's all pristine and clean. When they move out, oh, well, this is broken, that's broken. Well, I didn't do that, it just broke. Okay, so now do you see that? A periodic tenancy, which with no fixed term, the tenant will be able to give 2 months notice whenever they like, and the landlord will not even be able to give notice for the first year. Is that fair? Is that a fair contract? No. That's not fair to both parties, is it? It's very one-sided. Okay, that's periodic tenancy. God knows how that's going to work. Grounds for possession. Now, it says we value contributions made by responsible landlords who provide, I'm sure you do value it, and believe that landlords must enjoy robust grounds for possession when there is a good reason to take back their property. So you can enjoy, landlords will be able to enjoy these new robust grounds, because I need these robust grounds. Before I didn't need grounds, now I need these robust grounds for possession where there's a good reason to take back their property. Yes, I'm going to really enjoy this Renters' Rights Bill and Renters' Rights Act when it reaches the law, when it's enacted. To support this bill clarifies and expands grounds for possession, ensuring tenants are protected from arbitrary eviction. Again, we'll go back to this arbitrary eviction. And landlords must, as in the current system, go to court if the tenant doesn't leave, yes, and need to provide evidence that the ground is met. So, and I'm going to go on to some of the grounds in a second. So for mandatory grounds, the courts must award possession if the ground is proven, right? For discretionary grounds, the court can consider if an eviction is reasonable, even when the ground is met. The court can consider whether eviction is reasonable, even if you meet the ground, okay? Where a tenant is at fault, landlords can give notice using the relevant grounds at any point in the tenancy, can give notice at any point. This includes where a tenant commits antisocial behaviour. So if you've got a really bad tenant, that should be fairly straightforward. But often it's not the really antisocial bad tenants we're talking about. We're just talking about getting possession of your property. And it says we will introduce new protections for tenants who temporarily fall into arrears. That's an interesting one there, who temporarily fall into arrears. By preventing tenancies which are otherwise viable from ending. Okay, we will increase the mandatory threshold of eviction from 2 to 3 months arrears. So a tenant can go into arrears for 3 months before you can even start the ball rolling. And arrears increase the notice from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. Sorry, the mandatory threshold for eviction is 2 to 3 months and arrears, and increase the notice period from 2 to 4 weeks. This will allow tenants more time to repay the arrears and remain in their homes. See, the thing is, what they're saying is the government have not built enough properties to house people, and they want to contain them in with us, even though they're causing us trouble. And this is what councils do: is they'd stay where you are, stay in your homes, stay in your homes, until you go to the bitter end of bailiffs coming around. Then we'll rehouse you. But then when they rehouse them, they haven't got council properties. They're putting them with other landlords who take homeless people, and they just haven't got enough of these properties. You know, they're full basically. You've got tens of thousands of people coming in every day on boats. You've got people, over 1 million migrants coming in the last year or so. 1 million. These include students and work permit holders and that sort of thing. But they all need to be housed. They need to find housing. So there's just not enough around. So they're enforcing this on us to make up for their inaction, incompetency, really. And it says landlords do not face unsustainable costs. Well, landlords can continue to use discretionary rent arrears grounds, for example, if the rent is repeatedly late. It says, and it acknowledges here that landlords' own circumstances can change, and the bill includes strengthened rights to reclaim properties where it is necessary. What strengthened rights? We had the right anyway. For example, if you sell or move in, tenants will benefit from a 12-month, listen to this, 12-month protected period at the beginning of the tenancy, during which landlords cannot evict them to move in or sell the property. Landlords will need to provide 4 months' notice when using these grounds. So they've got 12 months protection, but they can give us 2 months. That's the two fingers. You've got 2 months, I'm going. Pardon the, if you're not in the UK, you probably don't know what that means, but it's a bit like the one finger salute, but this is 2 months, okay? For example, to say tenants will benefit with the 12 months. Yeah, I've said that. Landlords will need to provide 4 months notice when using these grounds, giving tenants more time to find a new home and reducing the risk of homelessness. Okay. I think in practice, landlords will pre-warn a tenant that, look, after the end of this year, I'm not going to renew this tenancy, but then they still have to serve the notice in case the tenant said, well, he didn't serve me notice, I'm not moving. You don't say that in a hotel or an Airbnb. I'm not moving. You didn't serve me 2 months' notice. You need to provide grounds and this sort of thing. In some sectors, it's necessary to move tenants on where accommodation is intended for a particular purpose. Whether, for example, the current tenant may no longer need the accommodation and is no longer eligible to occupy it. Oh, I don't need this anymore. Have it back. Find another tenant, pay another agent fee, clean it up after me. We will therefore introduce a limited number of possession grounds to ensure that there is an adequate supply of properties in the vital sectors such as temporary and supported accommodation and for critical housing schemes as stepping stone accommodation. And then they go on, and there's another point. I'm just going to go down. I urge you to really read this. Rent increases. In line with the government manifesto, we will empower private rented sector tenants to challenge unreasonable rent increases. This will prevent unscrupulous landlords from using rent increases as a backdoor means of eviction, while ensuring rents can be increased to reflect market rents. This is complete nonsense. Where do these people live? I mean, what planet are these people on? Landlords, why would they put in an unreasonable rent increase to get rid of a tenant who's there and paying rent? Why not give a reasonable rent increase and let them stay? They don't want to kick people out. They want people to stay. Unless I mean, if they didn't want them to stay, they could just serve them a Section 21 notice. I just don't get this. In future, all rent increases in the private sector will be made using the same process. Landlords will be able to increase rents once per year at the market rent, the price that will be achieved if the property was newly advertised to let. To do this, they must serve a simple Section 13 notice setting out the new rent and giving at least 2 months notice for it to take effect. But if the tenant believes that the proposed rent exceeds the market rent, they can then challenge it at the first tier tribunal. And this I mean, you wouldn't get an appointment there for a few months. First tier tribunal includes all sorts of things like employment disputes and immigration appeals, and who would determine when the market. So you can get some dotty old judge saying, well, I don't think this is reasonable. What do they know about whether it's reasonable or not? I guess the landlord would have to produce evidence. This is reasonable. The tenant would have to produce evidence, but this is all going to take time, isn't it? It's all going to delay things, and money as well, because there's some landlords going to have to get time off work. They have to maybe get a solicitor involved. Blah blah blah. If the tenant believes, okay, first tier tribunal, we will reform how the tribunal works to ensure tenant feels confident. Oh, all going to help the tenant in challenging poor practice and enforce their rights. Currently, tenants face the risk that the tribunal may increase the rent beyond what the landlord initially proposed. We will end this. So it can't work for the landlord in their favour. Okay, implementation. Let's just go down a bit here. To end the scourge of Section 21 evictions, you can see the language they're using. As quickly as possible, we would introduce a new tenancy for the private rector system in one stage. Now, on this date, when this act is, when it goes from a bill to an act of parliament and becomes law, on this date, the new tenancy system will apply to all private tenancies. Existing tenancies will convert to the new system, and any new tenants signed on or after this date will be governed by the new rules. Okay, all the tenancies are going to convert to this new system. Existing fixed terms will be converted to a periodic tenancy, and landlords will no longer be able to serve Section 21 or the old style Section 8 notices to evict their tenants. This single date will prevent confusing the two-tier system and give all tenants security immediately. Right? You hear that? I mean, you've got to read this thing under implementation. And it said we work closely with all parts of the private sector to ensure a smooth transition. It sounds really smooth, doesn't it? A smooth it sounds so nice, a smooth transition into the new system, and will provide sufficient notice ahead of implementation. So the bill to go to law would normally take about a year, because it's got to go through the first reading at Parliament, then go to the House of Lords, comes back again, blah, blah, and back and forth. So, but then, you know, the government have got a massive majority in both houses, in Parliament and in the Lords, thanks to Tony Blair, appointing hundreds of Labour backing Lords. So they've got a majority there. I don't think they're going to have any problem with this. And you know, after that time, this is going to happen maybe a year, and then they might give an implementation period of 6 months to a year. So it's not going to happen tomorrow. So you know, it says we'll work. I mean, I know that the Landlords Association, the NRLA, are working with the government, but how much notice they're going to take, I just don't know. I mean, if it's got this far like this, they obviously haven't taken any notice. You know, the last government under Michael Gove hasn't taken much notice here. And it says the bill makes specific provisions to ensure a smooth transition to avoid unnecessary cliff edges. For example, maintaining the validity of rent increases and notice periods. Okay, so I think as with rent controls, I think a lot of landlords might decide whether they're going to put up the rent now or might just decide to quit. And we remain committed to so this section, abolition of Section 21 is mentioned time and time again. It's definitely going to happen. Yeah, so, you know, that's it. And yet, you know, in the public sector, if you go into arrears on a housing association, they'll never house you again. You know, you're blacklisted forever. So look, then they've got here, Table 1, grounds for possession. And it's got a list here: occupation by landlord or family, landlord or the close member of the family wishes to move into the property, cannot be used in the first 12 months of a new tenancy, 4 months notice, sale of dwelling, 4 months notice, sale of dwelling, house under rent to buy, 4 months notice, sale by mortgagee, that's where there's possession, 4 months notice. Okay, and then it goes on about superior leases, possession by superior landlords. I won't go into all of that. You can read that. Student accommodation, in the 12 months prior to the start of the tenancy, the property was let to students, can only be used for specific education, and there's a 2-week notice there. And it goes on about ministers of religion. For some reason, the property is held for use by a minister of religion to perform their duties of their office and is required by occupation by a minister of religion, only 2 months. Then it's got other grounds like agricultural worker, 2 months. I don't think you'll be able to use that in the middle of London or Manchester. And then it's got people who are employed by the landlord and so on. So those are all the grounds there. You can read those yourself. Death of a tenant, just discretionary grounds here. Suitable alternative accommodation is available for the tenant, only 2 months' notice. Any rent arrears, the tenant is in any amount of rent arrears 4 weeks under discretionary grounds. But again, the tribunal could decide, against you. Persistent arrears, 4 weeks. Breach of tenancy, 2 weeks. Deterioration of property, caused damage, 2 weeks. Antisocial behaviour, said landlord can begin proceedings immediately for antisocial behaviour. Domestic abuse, 2 weeks. So there you go. I think I've gone through quite a lot there. And it's got how does it work currently. We're going to see more detail come out in this, but I think that there's some worrying things there. Definitely, there are some things. And I was at a landlords meeting at a council office last night, and noticed a couple of things. One is that a lot of the landlords there look middle-aged to 60s and above, and they look tired, and that some of them are literally retiring. So you're going to get a lot of landlords actually retiring. It goes in, and a lot of landlords are getting out because of things like Section 24. They're getting out because of more red tape. They're getting out because, Section 24, by the way, is the thing that George Osborne brought in, and it's really hit landlords now. Some are in negative rental situations where the rent doesn't cover their mortgage payment because of the tax they're having to pay, and they're paying more tax. So they're actually, because of their tax bill is going up, the net rent they're getting, the net amount they're getting in their pocket is less than the rent that they're receiving. I hope that's made sense. So there you go. That's the renters' rights bill in more detail. As I said, it was going to take time to be enacted into law, and this, I think, has been introduced now by Angela Rayner, who was the one who bought her council house, but now wants to stop other people buying their council property under right to buy. There was also a bit of controversy over her council property because she had another property. She then sold one of them, and there was some controversy over whether she should have paid tax, but that was all covered now. She doesn't have to pay any more tax. But the other thing that's come out this week is that the government are abolishing this winter fuel allowance, and it turns out that she alone claimed £4,000 heating allowance for fuel allowance on her second property, because a lot of MPs have 2 properties. They live in one, they have one in the constituency or one in London. Second property, she claimed £4,000, as many Labour MPs have, £4,000 fuel allowance on their second property, but they're snatching away £300 winter fuel allowance from people who've paid into their pension all their lives. The state pension is only around £11,000. It's not easy to live on that when you're paying maybe rent or other bills and that sort of thing. So that, I think that's going to come back to haunt them personally. I was at this landlords meeting last night, and as I said, I noticed that a lot of the landlords are really getting tired. They're really getting, and they're just fed up with the situation. Even the council officer said to me, he's worried because they deal with homeless families. They need private landlords to house homeless families because they haven't got the properties themselves. So he's worried that a lot of landlords are telling him that they're getting out. So it's, I know we're hearing sort of anecdotal things, but a year or two ago, I reported that 85,000 landlords had quit the market. And we know that new borrowing is down. If you look at the figures on new buy-to-let, borrowing is down. And the other thing that's affecting landlords' decisions is what Section 24, as I said, higher interest rates, lower yields. Properties that people are buying now will not give them as high yield as they would 10 years ago. Why? Because rents have risen less quickly than the values of properties. So in other words, let's say you could buy a property years ago for £100,000 and get 10,000 a year rent, 10% yield, right? 10 into 100, 10% yield. But if that property's gone up to say £200,000 or £250,000, and your rent maybe has gone up by say £5,000, it's not the same yield, is it? The yield has gone down. Prices go up, rents are not catching up. One landlord said that she's noticed that in her area, over the last, I think, 20 years, she said rents have doubled, but prices have tripled and quadrupled in some areas. So the yield is not so. A new landlord coming in cannot get a good a deal as they could years ago. If you're lucky, you're getting 5 and 6%. Speaking to someone today who's buying in Birmingham, we worked out his yield 6%. Now you can get 5% on your money in a bank and an online bank, and on a variable rate instant access account. You can get fixed accounts paying 5%. Now, that doesn't take into account, of course, using a mortgage to buy the asset and using leverage. So it's still an advantage buying a property. So you get lower yields, price rises. Yeah, I just think that the sector is not looking in a healthy state at the moment. Many landlords are panicking about this, but let's see how it works out. Could you switch into leasing your property to a local authority? Does that get around this? We don't know. What about landlords who go into the temporary accommodation market under sort of Airbnb type properties, holiday lets? Will they hit landlords there with more legislation? We just don't know. But definitely the combination of Section 24, red tape, more legislation. We can see more of it coming in here, and then things like going on the database and higher interest rates and all these factors taken into account, and a lot of landlords getting older and tired. Then this is why I think a lot of landlords are either quitting or switching into another model of investing the money. And one old landlord told me, this is my retirement. I need this money. I didn't put much into pensions and private pensions. This is literally my retirement. So you're hitting pensioners with some of these measures. But let's see how it works out. I mean, the industry is lobbying against this to try and stand up for the rights of landlords. You can join the NRLA as a landlords association. They've got quite helpful stuff, tenancy agreements, legal help, information, meetings, and there was an NRLA representative there last night talking about this. So it's worth joining. It doesn't cost much. I think it's only about 100 quid or something. It's not very much, and it will help you with your education as well. So that's it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. And I am happy to receive comments from people who say my content has been useful. So please like and share this. It's always encouraging to me that when people say, yes, we found your content useful and helpful. So keep it up. So do comment in this. And if you need any help with any of this, especially on the Section 24 tax situation, you're in that trap, then I've got a firm of accountants that are helping many people get around that and give them really good advice, and they'll give you a free consultation on Zoom to start the ball rolling. So thanks very much. In my next episode, I'm going to be talking about the amount of millionaires leaving the UK. You'll be astounded by that. So do tune in for that. Thanks very much, and bye for now.